Hello, everyone. Welcome to Midway Gaming. I'm Nico, and this other comms, of course, Justin. Disclaimer: this is the third video in our trilogy for things that have been done in the past. We're now filming this on the 25th of July, actually. So, if anything happened in the several weeks since this video was created, you know, EA dissolved, the executives are now out of jobs. Bethesda gives public apology for
The
existing.
zombie
You know,
apocalypse, anything, everything. Don't worry about
anything,
it.
everything. Then yeah, this is why it's kind of thing. Justin's gonna be going away, so since the editor's out of the shop for a few days, for a few weeks, I should say, we decided to film these in advance. Okay. So, with housekeeping over, let's go into my mad theory for this video. This one's not gonna be about news per se, but it's gonna be about a theory I've been telling Justin, and it's very big bother, big brain bother,
And the
and
neuron
basically,
connections have synapsi.
the neurons have been activated. It has to do with basically the Destiny timeline as of currently stands, and more importantly, the issues surrounding season of the episode echoes. I'm so sorry, Bungie. Um, and more specifically, how the current issues surrounding Saint 14, in the words of a certain scientist of YouTube, makes no goddamn sense. Let me explain. So, the entire series or season episode? Nah, I'm still getting used to saying the word episodes, but let's be honest, a controversy around echoes certainly means that saying season doesn't really work. Doesn't really, affect anyone either, because we all think it's a season anyway. Anyways, rambling over. So, the whole point about this season, right? Or, there I go again. The whole point of this thing, Echoes, is that Saint 14 has this crisis going on, and it has to involve the conductor, who we're pretty certain is Maya Sundaresh's, 12th iteration. And basically, what happens is Saint gets brought to Io by this individual, and they kind of speak in his head, and they tell him, "You're a copy. You're a duplicate. You're not from this reality. The original Saint is dead. You should be dead too. Just throw yourself off a cliff because you shouldn't exist." Yada yada yada. Bunch of things that'll induce a midlife crisis, as well as a. And the term just slipped from my mind. That is awkward. A. Oh my goodness, that's gonna bother me now. Problem.
You serve no purpose. You should redact yourself now.
That's pretty much the extent of the conversation, though, yeah. The conductor basically gives Saint an extreme crisis of existence. Forgive me, I don't remember the exact term off the top of my head at the moment. And Saint comes back and he's like, "I shouldn't exist, I shouldn't be here, I should be deleted." And it's kind of only gotten worse over the last few weeks, because in one of the recent bits of dialogue between Saint and Osiris, Saint reveals that the moment him and Osiris told each other they loved them, is actually different in Osiris's memories based on what Saint remembers. Now, I won't bother you with the actual differences, because for the sake of this video, it doesn't really matter. But for the sake of it, just know that there is a difference, supposedly, according to Saint.
And mind you, after this moment, Saint has an extreme existential crisis.
Yes, that's the word. Existential crisis. Thank you. So yes, this whole existential crisis created by the conductor is a neat little story thread, except for the small fact that it doesn't work. Because, in my personal opinion, the timeline and how time is being treated within the context of this episode doesn't make any sense with relation to Saint. We're just gonna excuse the small bit of hypocritical arrogance of the conductor, who again is Maya Sundaresh's 12th copy, calling Saint a simulation, a copy of a copy of a copy, and therefore he should not exist because copies are bad. Just completely excusing the fact that she herself is the 12th copy of another person. But potato potato. So, when it comes to the actual bit revolving Saint itself, I personally believe, in my humble opinion, that that doesn't really work with how time works. Now, before those who type in the keyboard saying, "Well, this is a video game, they can make their own rules, yada yada," I'd say, yeah, sure. Most of the time, I would say, yes, games can make their own rules, fictions can make their own rules, because Bungie can do whatever they want. However, Bungie generally tries to keep things within the scope, generally speaking, of the world, and they try not to invent their own stuff. Well, they do invent their own stuff, but they generally try to keep things grounded in some level of actual science. it helps with the whole immersion thing. And I've listened to a bunch of people talk about the whole business with Saint, and no one's really pointed out this oddness. Hell, even Bife, who I watched his video earlier on the whole business with Saint, pointed out that this whole business with Saint and time looks very similar to what they did in Marathon, which is just, if this is a Bungie attempt to shoehorn in a Marathon reference, I swear to flippin' Otis, swear to Lotus, Warframe reference for you. Because as far as I'm aware, and as far as Bife says, that whole storyline involving Marathon also makes no flipping sense, involving times, dreams, and a few other things. Which just goes to show you how absolutely ludicrous this all is. There's really two states of time that we know of that exist, and it's basically these two theories. We have box time, which, funny name aside, basically is just a version of linear time that kind of has been tweaked to explain the whole grandfather paradox problem. Basically, everything that happens is set in stone, and no matter what you do, it'll happen anyway. So, the example I saw is if you go back in the past and you try to, I don't know, fix a door frame, for example, that broke because you rammed into it or something. Well, you can fix it, go back into the past and fix it, but then fate will conspire to break it anyway. So, nothing can really be changed, only the small minor details. Overall, the big beats will still be the same, effectively. And again, forgive me for the armchair discussion of quantum physics and how time works, but if I had to explain the entirety of how time works in a multiverse and linear setting, we'd be here all night, so let's not do that. Moving on, though, we have the other version of time, and that's the one you typically see portrayed in cinema and stories, and in Destiny, it seems. And that is multiverse theory. Basically, multiverse theory says that while you can travel back and forth in time and you can change things, you cannot actually alter your own timeline. Let me explain. So when you go back into past, right, let's say an hour, you're not actually going back in time in your timeline. You're going back in the past in an hour in someone else's timeline. And you're basically creating another reality. So let's say you go back an hour before lunch and you had a sandwich and you're like, you know what? Or you see someone eat a sandwich. That's more easy to understand. So you see someone eat a sandwich. You're like, nah, it doesn't look like a good sandwich. So you're back in time by an hour, and you say to that guy, don't eat that sandwich. Eat the soup. Eat the soup. It's better. And he goes, okay, I'll eat the soup. Now you go back to your time, and you look at the guy, and you ask him, what'd you eat for lunch? He goes, a sandwich. But I asked you to eat the soup. It's weird, I ate the sandwich. The point here is that in the multiverse theory, while you can go back in time and influence events, you can do so, but you will only be influencing another reality's version of events. The actual timeline you're on, your own timeline, will remain unaffected. So technically, you really can't change the future or the past in this way, in a way, unless you're bringing stuff back with you. Like you bring the two guys and you swap them, which is a whole other ball of wax. My whole point to this is that in these two timelines, it doesn't really work with what we're seeing here, right? Because linear time would basically state that, or the box theory, excuse me, would basically state that, okay, if we tried to fix the whole problem of Saint being dead, something would conspire and he'd die anyway. So we can't have gotten through that theory. Multiverse theory, which seems to be the prevalent theory that seems to be going on in Destiny and many cinemas, and again, not surprising, as I've said before, multiverse theory allows time travel without also wrecking the timeline, so it's quite convenient. In the case of multiverse theory, however, the entirety of reality, so to speak, would effectively be a carbon copy, as far as we know, to said other timeline. Now, again, I do not have a doctorate in physics and time and math. No, I do not have a doctorate in advanced physics, so forgive me if I'm giving inaccurate to some degree descriptions, but again, it's for the sake of brevity. My point is that these inconsistencies we're seeing here with Saint and Osiris shouldn't exist even when we factor in the timeline theory. Because again, in the multiverse theory, we should be going to a different version of time altogether, fixing the whole issues revolving around Saint being dead. And he should be fine. But there's also another big issue here, because you're thinking, well, there's the whole corridors of time and that, and yada yada yada, and the Vex always make things murky. Okay, fine. let me give you another reason why this time doesn't really work, because we've already discussed that on a technical level, this shouldn't really matter. But what about in-universe, right? Because, as I've said earlier, Bungie can make their own rules. Well, here's the problem. Even by their own rules, this doesn't make sense either. Because remember how we saved Saint? Back in the Season of the Dawn, we were in the sundial, which basically messed around with the timelines. And you could say, okay, multiverse theory there, which I could go on a rant and say, if multiverses also exist, then that means the whole plot in Season of the Dawn also doesn't matter, because if the Scion Sisters actually managed to win the Red War retroactively via the sundial, that wouldn't actually affect our timeline anyway, so unless they plan to start shipping Red Legion soldiers into our timeline via said sundial, it wouldn't really matter, but I'm getting off track. But my point is that Bungie's way of playing with time makes less sense the more you think about it. But anyways, going back to the whole Season of the Dawn plot arc, throughout our messing around with the sundial, we come across the perfect paradox, which, by its name, is linked both well with Saint and exists as a perfect paradox. Basically, what happened is that we created the shotgun, but Saint was also buried with it and used it till the day he died. So how did this happen? Well, we created the shotgun, and through the Season of the Dawn, via the corridors of time, we go back into the past, give him the shotgun. He used it throughout his whole time. He then takes the shotgun. He dies with the shotgun. We come around later in the future and take it, and then through this, we go back in time and give him the shotgun again. Am I lost you yet? Good, good. Okay, so basically that's how the perfect paradox exists. But on this version of the perfect paradox we find in the corridors of time, or are messing around in the sundial, it's unique. It has our version of the light signature on it, because remember, we created it, but it's different, indicating that it might come from a different timeline. Maybe. Maybe. You might think, wait, didn't you say that wasn't possible? We'll get to that. So, we take this shotgun, right? And we go to these temporal coordinates. And we find Saint in these critical moments of his life. The first timeline, or first version of him we find is when he was very young as a Guardian, and that's when we give him the shotgun, and all the stuff that involves his life ensues. The second timeline we go to is the critical moment where he dies or gets killed. This is the moment we go back to and save him. Now, remember, all of this is happening within the bounds of the Infinite Forest, at least the second half of this. So, what does this mean? Well, it means that the version we're interacting with comes through the Infinite Forest. And the Infinite Forest is a Vex reality simulation engine. And this engine simulates all of realities, as its name implies. But it cannot create anything. So anything that comes from the Infinite Forest, unless it's Vex, probably wouldn't exist outside the bounds of the Infinite Forest. Because again, it's just a simulation engine. It can't create matter, as far as we know. So we save Saint in the past, and he says, no, you go on ahead, I'll come around a long way. Okay. So we go back to our present time, and we wait. And then we go back to the point, some point in time, via, again, the sundial, and we pull him out. Now, as a result of this, you would imagine that this Saint, since he came from the sundial, or from the Infinite Forest, would assume that he is the same Saint as the one in our timeline. Or at the very least, so similar that it's indistinguishable. Because remember, multiverse theory says that other realities can exist, but there wouldn't really be any discrepancies. There shouldn't be any discrepancies. So again, even when you factor in the fact that, yes, the sundial might have allowed us to find another version of his Saint, but even then, as far as, again, I'm aware, multiverse theory doesn't allow any discrepancies for the most part, unless somebody's going back and making them. And the discrepancies we're told that exist is, again, the moment where Saint and Osiris tell each other that he loves them. Specifically, Saint tells Osiris. And the difference is, basically, whether Osiris immediately says it back or not. Again, it's a very small indiscrepancy, and Osiris in the very cutscene or dialogue points out that it's an insignificant difference. And you can sit there and debate whether he's right or not, but the point is that it is a difference. A difference that should not exist unless someone influenced it. And something tells me the Vex did not go back in time and influence how Saint confessed his love to his partner for the sake of this. This doesn't feel like something they do. So it doesn't really work. Again, how time works when it comes to Destiny, when it comes to at least this whole matter, doesn't really make sense. And the long and short of my whole rant here is that the whole arc we're having right now with Saint having his existential crisis via time displacement, where he is the Saint but he's not the Saint, yada yada yada, doesn't really work. Because again, the version of him that exists could be identical to the one from before. So all in all, it just doesn't make sense. This whole plot involving his existential crisis doesn't really work as well as it should. Now, I'll play my own devil's advocate and say that there are holes in my theory. No theory is perfect without its holes. Or no theory is bereft of holes, I should say. No theory is perfect.
Everything has some level of problems to it.
Yeah. Again, you could say that, well, since it's multiverses, then maybe there are discrepancies and yada yada. And since it's a different shotgun, like I said, and the sundial's involved, so he wasn't purely in the Infinite Forest, so it's not purely our Saint, because remember, we rescued him from the Infinite Forest, so you'd think the version we're rescuing is from our timeline. But again, since the sundial was involved between the process, maybe it's a different timeline. But again, long story short, that's a mess. Again, Bungie does try to like to have things rooted in some level of actual science for the sake of practicality. Hell, they've been doing this since Halo at least, maybe Marathon. It's the reason why the science, roughly speaking, involving Halo rings works. Now, you want to build your own Halo rings, you can't, because at a very fundamental level, it kind of breaks down, but generally speaking, it makes sense for the most part. And that's why when it comes to things like pointing out, well, it's a fictional universe, so they're playing on different rules, unless there are actual things in that universe that explain that they're playing by different rules, it doesn't really work.
And here's the important part when it comes to like the Halo rings is the fact that the Forerunners basically had such a good understanding of the world that they were able to basically entirely manipulate like gravity and all sorts of other things. So it makes sense that they would be able to like create artificial gravity wells that allow them to go and create superstructures.
Right.
Like things like that make sense because then when combined together allow for an overall okay, this will make sense. But little inconsistencies overall as they stack up do overall make a okay, but you have a glaring problem here.
Yeah. And again, a good example of how time is kind of played by its own rules in another in another fictional universe is actually a game I was just playing earlier before this show, Warframe. Warframe has a concept in its timeline known as eternalism. Now, this is a completely made up concept as far as I'm aware, but again, I don't have a physics degree, so maybe it's not. But basically, as far as it goes, eternalism is this concept that everything that could happen is happening, will happen, should happen, can happen, and is happening all at once, never, and at the same time in one place, but never nowhere else. Confused yet? Good. And the whole
Everything
reason
that
this.
was, is, and can be is.
And at the same time, at the different places, but at the same place, but not at the same place. And again, all of this is possible, is explained in game itself, somewhat, via the Void, this extra dimension that exists in the Warframe universe, kind of like the Warp from 40k, actually, except only ruled over by one Eldritch entity, as far as we know. And is not destructive per se, but just very Cthulian when it comes to opinions and mindsets, so, eh. But my point here is that This extra dimension explains away the weirdness that is associated with how time works there. Same thing like it kind of does in Warhammer. The warp does weird things, so weird things are possible, such as time travel and dimension travel, and all this other nonsense. But when it comes to Destiny, we're playing with basic time here, and while the Vex are timey-wimey manipulators, they themselves, as we are told over and over and over again, are bound by causal concepts. So in other words, they don't have space magic like the other factions, like the Hive or the Guardians, or I can't think of anything else. Like, well, the Awoken. Let's go with the Awoken as well. They don't have the space magic of the other factions, and they don't want. Well, they maybe do, but they don't have it, and they don't calculate it. So everything they do is based in basic concepts. And it's one of their great weaknesses, but that's beside the point. So again, when you look at how time works, you would think that multiverse theory would then invalidate this whole issue of inconsistencies. Again, there are plot holes like, yes, this would still allow for different saints of different timelines. Yes, this is true. After pondering my theory, I came to this realization as well. However, these inconsistencies, as far as I'm aware, would still no longer be valid. You'd still have a perfect duplicate of a saint. So, what are these inconsistencies? Unless, like I said, the conductor messed with his head, but that's a whole other story. And like I said, it's hilarious that the conductor calls Saint a copy of a copy of a copy, despite the fact that she is herself a copy of a copy of a copy. And Saint is himself convinced that he is a simulation, but remember, while he was in the Infinite Forest, he himself is not a simulation. This is just multiverse theory. This is a different version of him that is no less real. So that doesn't work either. Then again, this could also be explained away with the Titan being bird-brained. But, anyways, that is my whole rant on time. Again, it's my own personal take on the current episodic content we've got here surrounding Echoes, but I just find it weird that everyone's mentioning this oddness with Saint, yet no one's pointing out the fact that these inconsistencies really shouldn't exist. Again, unless the Vex are involved, which I really don't think the Vex care enough to switch how the Saint confesses he loves Osiris. I really don't think they care that much. So, Again, I'm not a perfect theory, though, so let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think it's real? Do you think it's not? And again, feel free to point out my holes or correct me, because, as I said, it's not a perfect theory, but I just find it weird that nobody's talked about this yet. And like I said, if this is if this is all just one grand attempt by Bungie to make a marathon reference, I'll just cite Bife's video on the whole matter as well, where he shows the timeline of the character that has all this happen to them in Marathon, and by his own admission, it's an absolute mess. It's just complete garbage in this. Don't. We don't talk about that. So if it didn't make sense there, what the heck did they think it would make sense here? That's all I'm gonna say. Anyways, what do you think, Justin? I know you weren't gonna talk much this video, but what do you think?
Time-wimey stuff make you go crazy, do it not?
I know. I've been bouncing around this theory for like several days.
It does open up the possibility for a number of things to end up happening, though, and that's an important thing that Bungie will have to address at some point in time.
As I told Justin when I first told him this theory, we're getting very close to a Rick and Morty episode here with how nonsensical things are getting. Like, honestly, I joke about it, but if you want a good experience, you want to just reference of what I'm talking about with multiverse shenanigans, that is literally the whole plot of the Rick and Morty series. I'm not even kidding.
Well, no, they don't mess with time, actually.
Well, no, they don't mess with time.
They rarely mess with time. They mess with reality, though.
They mess with reality.
Yeah.
Which is where we're slowly approaching at this point.
That is the one interesting thing about the Rick and Morty series, is the fact that it is very rare that they actually go on anything time-based, which is funny considering what their whole series is kind of based off of.
Yeah. But like I said, we're approaching Rick and Morty plotline here.
Yes. Reality is
Which,
meaningless as everything
yeah,
and anything happens.
yeah, reality is meaningless. Oh well. Anyways, that's my theory. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know down in the comments. Do you agree? Do you not agree? Poke holes? Whatever. Engage. Feed the algorithm. And from us here at Midweek Gaming, I wish you all a good week. Next week we should be back actually live, so maybe we'll talk about if anything interesting happened at that time. Maybe we'll bring it up briefly, or we'll just carry on. We'll see what happens. Bye-bye, everybody!